Hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled From Transaction to Process, How to Create a Customer-Centric Business Model. My name is Rihanna Collier. I'm Vice President of the Software Division at SIIA, and I'm delighted to have two great speakers with us here today. We have Matt Shanahan, VP of Product Strategy for Scout Service Source, and Dennis Pombriant, Managing Principal at Beagle Research. Before I introduce our speakers, turn it over to them, I just want to give a couple of quick housekeeping reminders. I'm not going to talk very long. I want to get us right into the content. I do want to let you know that all the phone lines are set on mute. We do want to make sure that we answer all of your questions today. So please use the chat box to the left of your screen to ask your questions. You can ask your questions at any point throughout the webinar. And we will address them at the conclusion of the main content. The webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of or a link to the recording as well as the presentation. So the slides will be made available to you if there's any questions there. And finally, I just want to point out a couple of upcoming SIA events that might be of interest to you and or someone on your team. First is the next event in our Deciphering series, which is Deciphering the CEO, taking place on September 24th in San Jose, California. That event is exclusive to CEOs. If you are a CEO or if your CEO is interested in participating, either by attending or even speaking, please let me know. My email address is there on the screen, and also the link to the event is there as well. Again, you'll receive the slides so you can use that for reference. And then I also wanted to point out another event which might be of particular interest to this group given today's topic is another event in our Deciphering series, which is Deciphering Customer Success, and that will take place November 13th in Boston, actually in Cambridge, right outside of Boston. Again, this is an exclusive event for customer success executives, CEOs, anyone looking to build a customer success team, which is what we're talking about here today too. So again, my email address is on the screen, and if you have any questions or would like to participate or learn more, please let me know. So with that, I want to turn it over to our first speaker today, Dennis Pombriant. You've probably seen some of his research or his content on CRM publications, and also maybe have even seen his new book, The Subscription Economy: How Subscriptions Improve Business. We're very delighted that Dennis took some time out of his busy schedule to be with us today. So I want to get right into it. And Dennis, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Very cool. Hi, Rihanna. Thanks very much for having me on. So I prepared 3 ideas for today. The idea of customer bonding, identifying customer moments of truth, and using analytics to understand moments of truth that actually drive bonding. So first, let's start with bonding. Acquiring and retaining customers today is harder because you have less opportunity to directly interact with them. For example, prospects consume your content directly or through nurturing programs, and before you know it, literally, they've made decisions about whether or not to engage with you through processes that you may not even be aware of. And so much of what prospects listen to is other customers' experiences. And that's why bonding that leads to advocacy is so critical. We want our customers to advocate for us. And the most important customer-facing job today, I think, is driving bonding or creating customers for life. That's why we place so much importance on the customer experience and customer engagement. We want to put the customer in the center of our business. We want to drive great experiences, and we want to engage with them. But do we have enough customer knowledge to do all of this? It all comes down to bonding, because bonding drives customer advocacy. You need advocacy today because your best customers are also your best representatives on the web, in social media, in communities, and in real life. And they tell others about you, so doesn't it make sense to ensure that they say good things? Now, as I see it, customer bonding is governed by moments of truth. And you can think of a moment of truth as something that builds a set of experiences that determine an overall way of engaging with customers. Simply put, a moment of truth is one of those times when you or your product has to come through on a promise or a representation made about your company or your product. It's not just about your price, but also about things like a product's ease of use, or a no-hassle return policy, or cheerful, prompt service, or whatever you want to be known for. All of this goes into your customers' impressions of you, what they tell others, and ultimately their decisions to start or to continue doing business with you. These moments build naturally into cascades that result in decisions. The cascades can be broken at any point, and it's our job to identify the breaks and to repair them so that the overall process, filled with moments of truth, will be as good as possible. But what are moments of truth? They're unique to your business, and you need to know what they are. So a relationship is really a cascade of moments of truth that end up at a decision, the decision to do business or to recommend. It's a process leading to some form of transaction, and obviously the decision can go either way, which is why moments of truth are so important. I found that vendors think in terms of transactions that are at the end of processes, but customers think more about the processes themselves. So there's a big potential for disconnect if, for example, a vendor isn't aware of its moments of truth throughout customer-facing processes and doesn't prepare to excel at them.
Hey, Dennis.
Hey, yeah.
This is Matt. So I get I sort of get what you're building up to here. I'm assuming you've got some examples to kind of take us through what you mean by moments of truth in action.
You bet. Let's use Starbucks, since everybody's pretty familiar with them. There are a lot of places you can go for coffee, and perhaps you prefer some other vendor, and that's okay. My point is that Starbucks has carefully engineered their process. They have loads of moments of truth from the assortment of drinks that they make to order, paired with appropriate food. They've got a cheerful, friendly staff that gets to know its regulars by name. And also, they've got good lighting, interesting sounds, a comfortable place to consume your purchase, free Wi-Fi, and a policy of remaking any order that doesn't meet your expectations. Now, I could go on, but these are some of the major moments of truth in the Starbucks experience. Now, suppose you went to a Starbucks and one of those moments of truth was not to your liking. You might pass it off. But if the same thing happened repeatedly, you might find another Starbucks or even go to a competitor. You might even be so surprised about the miss that you tell a friend, hey, you know what happened to me at Starbucks? That's the essence of a moment of truth and the cascade that develops from them. Excuse me. Now, as a vendor, the more you can do to identify and quantify a moment of truth and maybe turn it into a metric, the better. In this example, you have a face-to-face retail situation, but what happens when vendors and customers meet on a relatively less friendly atmosphere of a subscription website? There, all a vendor might have are the data trails of customers coming and going. Those data trails form the basis of all kinds of metrics like customer lifetime value and propensity to churn, and a lot more. So identifying these moments of truth and being able to compare them across time helps to make your customer experience high quality and repeatable.
So, Dennis, as you think about this, so great examples. How do you identify these moments of truth, and how many of them should you be having?
Well, that's a little hard to say, and it depends on your products and customers. At Starbucks, most of the moments of truth are bunched into a small window. But suppose you're an airline. Your moments of truth stretch from buying a ticket to checking in, to checking your bags, to getting on board, to the actual flight, and then everything in reverse, getting off the plane, picking up your luggage, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of moments of truth, and each is significant. Generally speaking, though, I think the fewer the better. You can't be all things to all people, so you have to pick your spots, and there are ways to do this. So for example, you might engineer the potential for a negative moment of truth out of your product by making it simpler or more intuitive or whatever. A moment of truth ought to be something that you want to be known for and something that you can instrument or develop a metric for. So notice that Starbucks doesn't sell hamburgers. Many car companies specialize in the kinds of cars that they sell. There's luxury brands, or economy brands, or sporty brands, or safety brands, and a lot more. All of these vendors have picked where they want to compete by picking what they want to be good at. So the point is to be good at something and to be able to measure it and prove it.
So is this, I'm assuming this is where then analytics would play a role. I don't know if you can be more specific about that.
Sure. I think there are three major ways to use analytics in the customer lifecycle. You can use analytics to identify your moments of truth. You can use analytics to define them as metrics, and you can use those metrics to manage the business. We talked about the first one already, but it's very important to say that a moment of truth has to be both correlated with a desired outcome and causative of it. Very often people use analytics to discover all kinds of correlations, but when the correlations fail to be diagnostic of a favorable or desirable customer behavior, like making a purchase or giving an endorsement, they think there's something wrong. So, for example, vendors worry about abandoned shopping carts, for instance. But if a customer has no other way of finding out what something costs or what the available options are, they'll fill a cart. But it's in no way indicative of their intent to buy necessarily. So you have to be careful that what you're measuring with analytics is really what the customer means by their action. And the last idea is using metrics to manage the business. Once you have a moment of truth that accurately predicts future behavior, you naturally want to do everything in your power to optimize it. And the best way to do this is to establish a gold standard and then measure how well you're doing against that standard over time.
So then how do you operationalize this? I mean, what's the next step?
Well, dashboards are a good idea. I think they can represent groupings of metrics that drive your moments of truth and tell you how you're doing in aggregate.
But how does aggregate really apply to individual customers?
Good question. You can easily establish metrics for customers too, like, for example, the time it takes to get up to speed using a product. Suppose you use analytics to discover that your best customers are the ones that can begin using and making productive use of your product, say, within 30 days. They're your best customers long term. Would it make sense to analyze new customer use patterns? If you did, analytics could give you an indication of who needed your help most so that you could dedicate scarce resources where they're going to do the most good.
So you make it sound like technology or analytics is the remedy to all of this.
Well, I wish it was, but from what I've seen, the remedy, at least in cases like this, it still includes people, process, and technology. Analytics technology gives us ways to see into situations like never before so that we can craft and optimize business processes for customers. But at the end of the day, we still need to enable average people to do outstanding work for our customers. I think that's what analytics-driven processes enable. And I can't emphasize enough that employees armed with information that analytics can provide have to be able to act on that information. That's how they ultimately do their best work.
That's
I
great.
hope that was helpful.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So why don't we kind of transition a little bit and talk a little bit more in depth about analytics and the moments of truth. And specifically, how do you I think I want to build on the items you had identified is how do you discover these moments of truth? And let's try and use a real example. But ultimately, I think what you were indicating is this need to build a model of your customer life cycle. So you need a real hypothesis around that. Then there's
exactly
the question. Then there's the question of how do you operationalize this, evaluate performance, and expand. So maybe we'll go through a kind of a deeper example on this. One of which, so one key item that you had identified is being able to understand your customer lifecycle. So what are all the different stages that a customer goes through? And how do you have a hypothesis around that?
So Matt, would you say a customer lifecycle is a process?
I would say it's really more a group of processes. So if you think about just the onboarding process is a good example of one process within the overall life cycle. But the challenge is to link these processes together and keep them synchronized. And that's what will create a good customer experience. And ultimately, that leads to what you had indicated about bonding and creating real brand value for the customer. And I think go ahead.
I understand. Thank you.
So these moments of truth throughout the customer lifecycle, you can think about these different steps. So before the sale, when is somebody highly engaged and likely to buy? That's a key moment of truth. Is when do you engage them and how do you engage them? On adoption, is usage meeting expectations? So they came into using that product with a certain expectation around value. What is their time to value? Does that meet their expectation? Are they getting good value when they use the system? At the time of renewal, that's a really good moment of truth. Will they renew? Did they get enough value from the product or service during that period of time that they're willing to re-up? When is the usage? When are they getting more value? And that's a real moment of truth to decide when to engage a customer and say, hey, we need to do an upsell because of the value you're getting or the potential of what you could do. When is the next opportunity around a cross-sell and things like on-demand usage? So when should there be temporary access? So these are examples. These are not the only examples, but there's some examples, especially in the subscription economy, where your customers are really moving away from pay-to-own to pay-to-use. And so all of those usage elements become moments of truth throughout the life cycle. And the truth is, if you're able to proactively manage each of those moments of truth, as Dennis indicated, that's how you start to create this bonding. And ultimately, bonding leads to maximizing customer lifetime value. And in the subscription economy, it's really challenging because 90% of your revenue comes after the initial sale. In the software as a service industry, the average is 3.1 years for a customer relationship to break even. So you do want to create that bonding. You want to create that long-lasting relationship, both to get to profitability and then to grow, to not only grow with the customer relationship directly, but through advocacy to actually engage other customers. So we'll look into one of these. We had identified a couple of examples, but let's go deeper, for instance, on adoption. So adoption is one of these initial moments of truth. And we talked about kind of the question of time to value and is usage meeting expectations. And analytics can help you discover these moments of truth. So if you think about right post-acquisition, so you've closed the customer, you're onboarding them, everybody's motivated right at the beginning because there's an excitement about the new solution, the new relationship. And matter of fact, it actually turns out to bear itself in the data. So Dennis had talked about the trail of data customers leave behind. And here's an example that we found after studying a large number of subscription businesses. And what you're looking at is a chart that shows how quickly a user that's been provisioned becomes loyal. And what it shows is that the vast majority of users become active, loyal users within the first 32 days. Matter of fact, of the people that will become regular users, 70% of them happen within about that first 30 days. What that says is after 30 days, your likelihood that they will become a loyal active user is going down. By 52 days, you can see it dropped to 80% of all active users were acquired. And really by 97 days, 90% of those individuals had become loyal users. So it means there's less than a 10% chance that after 90 days anyone will become a loyal user. And that's one of these moments of truth, because you're really saying, I've got a window of opportunity to create active, loyal users within my system.
Now, Matt, who's actually responsible for finding these moments of truth? This is fascinating.
Well, really an owner of customer experience would be a logical starting point. But a lot of companies don't have that role, where there's somebody looking at the overall customer experience end to end. In that case, each department really starts to play a critical role. They need to take on responsibility and say, what is their role? Because we talked about the multiple processes. What is their role in making the customer experience better? And how can they collaborate with other groups as well so that they're doing it in synchronization with them?
I see.
So the other way, as Dennis had indicated, you really need to also correlate what is the impact this has on the business. And so in the case of adoption, really to understand how important that moment of truth is and to say, why should we manage it, you want to look at what is the impact to, for instance, retention. And this was a correlation of adoption to retention, so it had a direct causal link. And what you're looking at is two cohorts of customers. The red line represents a cohort of customers that did not renew after their first year with a subscription. The green line represents a cohort that did renew. In each of the data points at the 30, 90, and 180 day after provisioning, so once a customer goes live, 30 days later, what happened? With the churning customers, you'll notice that 31% of all the purchased users had become loyal active users. As compared with renewing customers after 30 days, over half of their purchased users were loyal and active. So it's already showing a change in the way people are using the system. After 90 days, you can see that there was a very small bump in the churning cohort, but in the renewing cohort, again, there was good growth, a 15% growth. And ultimately, they ended up with 71% of their purchased users becoming loyal active users by the 180-day mark. And that's a 2x adoption pattern over churners. So you're able to identify what is the impact, not only this one moment of truth of when does adoption occur, but how will that impact the long-term customer relationship. And if you think about it, 90 days makes logical sense. When you measure it from a contract go live date, that's 25% of a 1-year contract that's been completed. And with a subscription, you only have that window of time to make value out of your subscription. So now to get value, you have to shrink that into the remaining portion. And even on a 3-year contract, that represents almost 10%. So it's an important period of why that occurs. Now, once you've found the moment of truth, the question is, how do you use analytics to operationalize that? Here's an example, again, of one way to do that. So if you have a customer, and a portion of those users from the customer are what we call no-shows, so they have not logged in. They were provisioned and entitled, but didn't log in. Then you might have some others that are occasional users. They're logging in, but maybe not that frequently. And then you've got your loyal users. The ability to understand each of these individuals and where they fit against that moment of truth allows you to start to drive, for instance, automation. So in this case, you might, for instance, notify and put users into marketing campaigns like through Marketo or Eloqua or others. And that can actually do nurturing, where it's able to proactively outreach to these individual users and get them to engage with the system and drive value and create adoption. And so this ability to then understand what was the impact as a result of that. So if you looked originally without nurturing in this email campaign, and this comes from a study that we had done with a customer, they had 33% of their provisioned users became loyal users, 37% were occasional users, and 30% were no-shows. So that was the concern they had. By using user nurturing, reminding people to log in, helping do feature discovery, etc., the loyal user count actually went up to 54%. And they actually had 28% occasional users, and they reduced their no-shows to 18%. So you had a 21-point increase in loyal users and a 12-point decrease in your no-shows. And again, that's a great way to start driving adoption.
But what's critical? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. This has a really good ROI case, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So as you had indicated, one of the things is to take a look at this and then go back and benchmark against the correlation you had found and say, does it have a real impact? And decide on further investment. You know, if for instance you were able to increase your retention rate significantly on this one improvement, maybe you don't continue to invest in this technique. On the other hand, if you got an initial bump and you have room to grow, you can think about how do I make these campaigns perform more and more efficiently. In one case example, a company called Expert HR had exactly this challenge. So they had a great customer base, but they were getting increased competition. Expert HR does software and content solutions for the HR industry. And that increasing competition was creating challenges at renewals time. So what they wanted to do is figure out how could they use an automated login nurturing to do this. And this is where they implemented analytics around their moments of truth. And so during the onboarding process, they would look for those no-shows, and what they were able to do is drive their active user population up by 20%. And then they were able to grow their retention rate as a result of that pretty significantly. So these are examples of being used in real time with customers. The next is, once you've kind of tackled, we always believe in, tackle something very concrete, kind of build your process, and then think of how to expand. So for instance, building on that adoption side, one of the things that you may want to do is think about the upselling moment of truth. So you're not just trying to get to a renewal by driving adoption, but you want to get to an actual upsell. So you want to grow adoption of your capability. One of the ways that in order to get the upsell, you want to make sure that any loyals that you've developed, loyal users, that they continue to be loyal. And sometimes that changes. People stop using their logins, etc. So figuring out how to get continuous value delivery is critical to doing this. And so here's an example of, again, using analytics to understand when an active user, a loyal user, has actually has become a no-show, how to re-engage them. And in this case, the ability, what the customer used was a survey. And they had 3 simple survey questions. Did you forget your login? Is there something we can help you with, etc. And by using these 3 simple survey questions, they were able to figure out how to have a very specific engagement to re-engage that previously loyal user. And by doing so, their no-shows, they were able to pretty dramatically reduce. So they were able to get a 37-point lift in reactivation of previously loyal users. And by doing that, they found they could continue to drive adoption and utilization, which then led to upsells. And this also can occur in things like cross-selling. So a fairly standard technique for companies to do is to do marketing campaigns into their stakeholders, so the person they sold the solution to. And one company had a 3-quarter rolling average where, out of all their purchasers and stakeholders, they had 7,500 contact names. They would run a campaign every quarter. And essentially, out of the 7,500 emails that they were sending each quarter, they would yield 19 opportunities and 1 closed deal. So that was kind of what they were doing by kind of, if you will, just blasting out to customers. which isn't really engaging a customer in a unique way. What they decided to do was start to use techniques of not only talking to stakeholders, but talking to end users. So they grew their the contacts, if you will, by a significant amount, almost 33,000 new names they went after, 35,000 new names. Instead of running one campaign to everybody, they made them role specific. So they took on personas and they ran 12 different campaigns. And interestingly enough, what they did is they actually reduced the number of emails they sent out. So the triggers became behavioral. So they were looking for not only a role, but that the customer had done a certain action or taken a certain activity. And what they were able to do is actually generate 82 opportunities from that and 24 closed deals. And that's a pretty significant change when you look across the board. They're actually dropping the number of emails, but dramatically increasing the value they can bring to the customers.
So, Matt?
Yeah?
Matt, why is upselling and cross-selling considered a moment of truth?
Well, they're moments of truth because you might say, hey, it's self-serving to the company. But the reality is, the more you can do to increase brand value for a customer, meaning you can deliver new solutions when they need it, and that ability to anticipate what a customer needs and to engage effectively at the right time actually does build brand value and creates a good user experience, a good customer experience. So anticipating somebody's needs and offering the right solution at the right time is a great moment of truth.
Mm-hmm.
So as we mentioned, if you're able to really think about the entire customer life cycle, start to identify these key moments of truth, you really do create better value for your customer through a better experience, which is going to create bonding, which over the time horizon creates them as an advocate and ultimately really maximizes the customer lifetime value. And so, what Dennis and I have been kind of going through today is that customer-centric view of understanding these moments of truth, operationalizing the analytics around those moments of truth, and then continuously improving. And with that, I'll transition it back to Rihanna.
That was great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dennis. I want to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please use the chat box to the left of your screen, and we'll address your questions as soon as we can. And we do have a few questions. I have one. What are the steps to implementing customer analytics if you're a company that hasn't been doing this before, and how long does it take? And also, is it different for established companies versus startups?
There's a lot of good questions there.
All right, I just kind of threw them all at you, but.
So good. Dennis, do you have any thoughts?
I would defer to you.
Okay. So what we've seen. So first of all, the steps that we've seen are to identify a hypothesis of what you want your customer lifecycle to look like. So we have the diagram that we showed earlier. Generally within that, a team can identify what they believe to be their kind of critical moments of truth for customers. What are steps in onboarding that are critical? What are steps associated with adoption and training that are critical? What are things like QBRs, quarterly business reviews with customers? So once you've established a hypothesis around that, one of the other great ways is to just survey customers. Make sure to have a conversation with them and find out what's important to them. Then implementing an analytics package does become pretty straightforward. Once you know, here are the moments of truth that I want to go after, you're able to, there's lots of vendors in the marketplace. You can select a vendor. Typically, you will want a vendor who's also going to bring expertise to your team if you haven't done this before. And so that's where, making sure they've got revenue advisory services is really helpful. I think the challenge when you want to think about an existing company versus a startup, startup has an advantage that they can start out with data pre-integrated. They can think up front, I'm going to bring this data together day one. Existing companies, a lot of times the challenge they face is they have a lot of disparate systems that they hadn't thought about bringing together, and they need to think through the data integration challenge. But generally, both organizations, you're better off tackling that data integration early and getting your analytics program in place.
Now, kind of another two-part question here. Does this require having a customer, a chief customer officer or customer success team specifically? And the second part would be, if the answer is yes, how do you best find and train customer success people? Is there, specific incentives that you give them or a background that we should be looking for?
It's a great question. I think that the most important first step is to build a customer-centric culture. And that's really critical. So the ability to have a customer success team really comes out of the desire for a company to be customer-centric culturally. Now, if your company doesn't have that culture currently, the best thing you can do is to create that culture at a departmental level. And this is part of what I mentioned earlier about who's responsible for this. And it can start out, whether it's in marketing, sales, support, any of those groups can really start to think about creating better moments of truth, better customer experience, and seeing how that impacts. In terms of building a customer success team, there's a growing number of professionals out there and a growing number of resources to tap into. And again, it will vary from organization to organization as to how they want to tackle that.
In one of my experiences doing some research for a book I was writing, I interviewed a customer success representative, and I was surprised to learn that she had been she was a former grade school teacher, elementary school teacher, and you could just tell looking at her or listening to her that she was very other focused. She was interested in listening and understanding what her customers needed. And she was just a perfect fit for a customer success person. Generally, I've also seen that customer service people, some of them at least, can transition into customer success. And there are really a number of occupations, if you want to think of it that way, that enable where people have the skill sets to get into customer success management. I think one of the keys is understanding that the customer success person in your organization is not part of marketing or sales. They're not there to push product. They're there to push success and to make sure customers derive value from the product or the service that you're offering.
Thanks. We still have a number of questions, so I'm going to keep us going here. Another audience member has a question. How do you identify potential triggers for customer nurturing campaigns?
Well, there's a number of different things. So the key is different behavioral aspects from a customer engagement. So as an example, you can think of customers changing the configuration of their system, or customers not taking a certain action, so they haven't done a setup. Those would both be triggers. Taking an action to change my configuration or the lack of setup are two examples of triggers. And usually your product teams and your customer success teams understand, if you've mapped out the customer lifecycle, you'll know which of these triggers are supposed to happen. And you want to, as we indicated, if you've mapped that out, you'll know when exceptions happen. When did somebody not take an action? Or when is the action they took not expected? and so that you can use those as triggers to engage them. And that was the example that we saw, for instance, with Expert HR, of understanding, how people were engaging during the onboarding process and figuring out how to nurture them to be more engaged.
Thank you. So another question, we're using Net Promoter Scores to measure customer satisfaction. Is that sufficient?
Well, maybe. In my experience, NPS will certainly tell you how well you're doing, but don't forget how it works. Briefly, on a scale of 1 to 10, people are asked how likely they would be to recommend a company to a friend or a product, company or product to a friend. Now, the NPS takes the difference between the scores of 9 or 10, which are considered promoters, and the scores between 1 and 6, which are detractors. And they ignore the 7s and 8s. So you can see that subtracting your 1 through 6 from 9 or 10 will give you a number. Typically, that number is between negative 100 and positive 100. My advice would be that that's a great place to start. The best way to gain new or repeat business, however, is to figure out how to get those 7s and 8s to be 9s and 10s. And you can best do that by finding out what makes people detractors, because once you know that, the easiest converts will be the 7s and 8s. So when you discover what your moments of truth are, you can then use analytics to figure out how well you're doing against the goals represented by those metrics, and you'll be able to improve your game. And your first indications will be when your 7s and 8s get better.
Yeah. I'd build on what Dennis had to say. The Net Promoter Scores don't necessarily help you find moments of truth, and they certainly don't allow you to operationalize activity around it. But they do provide great feedback on whether any of your changes are having an impact on customer sat. So it's an element of the feedback loop that's really important to use if you're doing Net Promoter Scores in terms of how well are you addressing your moments of truth and improving on that.
Thank you. We still have a few more questions. What type of tools would you recommend for solving the data integration challenges?
So, for instance, Scout has a data integration framework. That would be the tool we'd recommend. But what it does is it brings in, you can imagine you've got disparate data sources, so subscription data, typically in a system maybe like Zuora, data in CRM system like Salesforce, you've got data in an entitlement system like Flexera, right? So how does all of that information come together with the usage into one? And by having data integration solutions that are bespoke to the problem, so they're designed to solve subscription management problems, makes it much easier. If you buy a general data integration framework and you build it yourself, it'll be more expensive to do. But the tool we'd recommend would be something like Scout.
Great, thank you. And apologies if you guys might have touched on this, but is there when you're looking at customer analytics and the customer lifecycle, is there a best stage in the lifecycle to focus on first when it comes to analytics?
Well, in my experience, every stage of the life cycle has moments of truth. And so my recommendation is to find the moments of truth and seek ways to improve all of them, because customer engagement is built up over time through multiple successful moments of truth, those interactions, and they can happen at any time. So you'll find that improvement stems from people, process, and technology, and those things tend to lend themselves to being done sort of together, not necessarily segregated. I mean, you may have a situation where customer services embarked on an endeavor to improve the customer life cycle, improve the moments of truth, and other parts of the organization may be lagging. But I think what you'll find is that culturally within the organization, once an organization says, hey, this is an important direction for us, it permeates the whole organization pretty rapidly.
Yeah, and I would really stress that from an initial implementation standpoint, align it to the strategic objectives for the company. So if for instance, if your retention rates are great and customers are really happy, but you're wanting to grow that customer relationship, you may want to focus on the cross-selling. On the other hand, if you do have a retention issue, you'll really want to focus around the onboarding and adoption process. So it's understanding kind of what your own growth needs are as a company as to where to identify the first step point with that customer.
Great, thanks. This may or may not be, a question you guys can really answer, but maybe with, what you see with the companies that you work with, specifically those that have customer success teams, do you see, is there a mix for compensation between base and variable? Are there incentives for customer success teams? I don't know if maybe, Matt, that's something within your organization you might be able to share, or with companies that you work with?
Certainly. Well, again, it will be all over the board, depending on, again, the culture of the organization. So customer success, and I'll take the kind of role-specific delineation. If customer success is really around customer sat and making sure that customers get full value out of their solution, then you will look at variable compensation around time to onboarding, and managing expectations, and setting some of those targets, operational targets for your customer success teams. And so achievement against those objectives and targets becomes pretty critical. And that can range, from some organizations will put it at 10% element, where if they're doing the variable comp, that has that component in there. Others will take it as high as 25%. And it gets down to a cultural aspect of how much, where you want to put the emphasis. And also, as you put that variable comp in there, you have to make sure that you've empowered your customer success teams to achieve those goals. So what's defeating is if you set a variable compensation, but then don't empower them enough to achieve those goals. So you've got to really balance that. So the more power you give them, typically the higher the variable cost or the variable compensation.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the customer analytics as well, that can help you measure the success of your customer success team, correct?
Yes.
If I could just make one point. Some research that I've seen relative to gamification, and when you're talking about incentive comp, there is a gamification element to it. They say the research shows that as little as 3% in some cases can be a great motivator. Echoing something that Matt just alluded to, it's critically important that you not simply meet with people and put out vague goals, and at the end of the quarter or the reporting period to try to do a guesstimate of how well people have achieved those goals. It's very important to set down specific MBOs and measure against them. Otherwise, you're not paying for performance, you're paying for luck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Let's see, we have another question here. How should you integrate customer segmentation, or how does that fit into this?
Well, customer segmentation matters a huge amount. So as you can imagine, moments of truth for an SMB or small and medium business company will be different than the moments of truth for an enterprise. So it's not as though there's just one customer lifecycle. We obviously simplified that for this presentation, but there's multiple customer life cycles. and where you have those multiple customer life cycles is how you want to think about the segmentation. And so it is critical to understand, how does that vary either by, if you're in business to business, how does that vary by industry segment or size of company? If you're in the business to consumer space, then you have to think about how does that vary maybe by demographic or geography. And those are all important elements in establishing this.
And Matt, maybe it was you telling me this a while ago, but wasn't there some study about customers in the second year of a contract behaving differently than customers in the first year, and customers in the third year maybe behaving a little bit differently? And isn't it kind of important to, if you're segmenting, you could even segment according to some of those parameters, couldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's that research that Scout had done. It shows that first year renewals, so a customer renewing after their very first year is really unwilling to take a price increase, and annual price increases are kind of a standard practice, versus customers in years 2, 3, 4, and beyond are more willing to accept that. And so if you're really customer-centric and it makes sense because that first-year customer had a whole bunch of onboarding and adoption they had to do. So if you're customer-centric, you would realize that, and you would have a different renewal process for first-year customers versus second or third-year customers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're approaching the top of the hour. I do have one last question. How often, if you have just these customer analytics, how often should you be really looking at that data? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Any recommendations?
Well, if it's operational, it's embedded into your process. It's not so much that you're going and looking at a report. It's really embedded in your process.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of evaluating the moments of truth, you need to think through, certainly on a quarterly basis, evaluating how effective the operational side is. So this is that continuous feedback. So you want to think about on a 90-day or 180-day basis, how well is that process performing, and what kind of changes could you make to it?
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for being with us today. I want to specifically thank Dennis and Matt. This has been great information, great content. I want to remind everybody that the recording will be made available and sent to you, the link to view it, as well as the slides that Matt and Dennis have presented to us here today. If anybody has any questions, further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm sure that Matt and Dennis would be happy to follow up. And again, I want to thank everybody. And Matt, Dennis, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.